Tonight, Mark has given us a glimpse into one of the darkest days in Peter's life, the day Peter denied knowing Christ. A denial that came just hours after Peter publicly declared that he would lay down his life for Jesus. To set the scene, let's review just a few significant conversations that had taken place earlier in the evening between Peter and Jesus. Earlier, Jesus had warned Peter that the evil one would sift him as wheat, that he would intervene in Peter's life with the goal of destroying his faith and confidence. Jesus then followed this warning with words of encouragement, saying that though in the moment Peter would fall and fail, his faith would not fail. Peter would turn back, and God would use his sifting to strengthen his fellow disciples. Also, earlier in the evening, Peter had declared his unfailing loyalty to Jesus, even unto death. But Jesus prophesied Peter would deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed. Just hours following these conversations, after Jesus' arrest in the garden, the disciples scatter and flee. Only John and Peter stayed behind. They followed Jesus to the high priest's house, the palace of the Sanhedrin. John, known to the high priest, was allowed inside. Peter waits outside in the courtyard where the darkness and cold are pierced by the flames of a small fire. The servants and guards are holding out their hands to the warmth, their faces lighted up. It's a risky place for Peter to be. Then 3 voices, one after another, speak out, and 3 hands point towards a face they recognize. It's the face of Peter. And the sifting begins. And the denials ensue. The first is a woman's voice. She is one of the maids in the palace. Looking the disciple in the eye, she exclaims, You too were with Jesus. A man's voice follows, You're one of them. Another man later makes the same accusation after hearing Peter's northern accent. You were with him. And faced with these declarations, Peter, feeling trapped, caught completely off balance, does not hesitate to lie. I do not know Jesus. I am not one of his disciples. I don't know what you're talking about. And the light of that fire reveals much more than his human face. It lays bare the human heart, its frailty, its selfishness, its fearfulness of being exposed. And from somewhere, a noise pierces the quiet of Jerusalem. But above all, Peter's own conscience. It is the sound of a rooster crowing. What makes this event all the more poignant and tragic is that all the while this loyalty test of Peter is being played out down in the courtyard, there is another dramatic loyalty test taking place above, in the residence of the chief priest, as Jesus is interrogated by the hostile religious authorities. an interrogation where Jesus, suffering their taunts and derision, is making true confession, openly acknowledging his identity as the Son of God by saying, I am, just as he had said all along. I am the way. I am the good shepherd. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the bread of life. It's painful to watch. But part of the pain of watching this scene is realizing how much like Peter we all are. Peter represents every one of us good, believing Christian people who have promised ourselves and others that we're going to live into our role as Christians, that we're going to walk the way of Christ in our lives, to do good, to love others, to set the world aright with bold words and righteous acts and equally righteous indignation, only to go scurrying into the night when it turns out that walking the way of faith would put us in some risky space. How many times, I wonder, have we stood by idly as an injustice was happening? Or someone was demeaned in our presence? When have we failed to stand up and be counted in matters of love and justice because we knew that such a conviction would be unpopular or politically incorrect? How many instances have there been when the prayers of the hearts inside these walls have been pushed aside outside these walls for fear of our being labeled as some kind of religious fanatic, or worse, one of those people? There's more than one way to deny Jesus. You don't have to say, I don't know this man with your words to do it. With every careless, unloving action towards my wife or husband, I say, I don't know this man. Every day I get up and live my day without reference to Jesus, I say, I don't know this man. Every time I cultivate anger, pride, socioeconomic, racial disdain, or lust in my heart, I say, I don't know this man. Every time I chase money instead of generosity. Every time I keep silent about Jesus out of fear of rejection by the culture or my neighbor for being one of those Christians, I say, I don't know this man. In a million different ways, my life, and if we're honest with ourselves, all our lives have communicated, I don't know this man. Even if we've sworn our life commitment to his path, like Peter, we fall short over and over again. I know all this sounds harsh, and I don't wish to suggest that any of us are bad people for having had moments like this, because understand, Peter wasn't a bad person. Remember that at the very end of this scene, we're told that Peter, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what was happening, broke down and wept bitterly. As is typical of Mark's gospel, that's all that's said. But you have to believe that Peter's weeping was the direct response to realizing just how far he'd fallen from where he'd been. It wasn't a calculated betrayal of Jesus like that of Judas. It wasn't the politically motivated actions of the local powers that be. the scribes and the Pharisees. It wasn't even a conscious effort to run as far away from the situation as possible, as seemed to be what happened to the other disciples. Peter tried to do the right thing where Jesus was concerned. In fact, he always tried to do the right thing where Jesus was concerned. But now, much to his surprise, as everyone else's, he had failed. Not once, but 3 times in the matter of a few hours. Peter fell. Peter was lost. And here lies the heart of the gospel. For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one might dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we are still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. At the heart of the mysterious story of good news is a God who comes to save us while we're still sinners. Before we do anything right. It's a hard place to be. And for me, one of the worst parts of this story is that where Peter is concerned, at least for now, this is where it ends. With him weeping over missed opportunities to do the right thing. We know, of course, that there's more for Peter. We know of that moment on the beach with the risen Christ when Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" We know there will be a moment of redemption for Peter, but tonight, Peter knows nothing of that. For the moment, at least, there's nowhere for Peter to go. Except, of course, to stand before the cross of Jesus. And so it is for us tonight, as we sit beneath the cross. But understand, the message of that cross is not to make us think we need to clean up our act before we come to Jesus. Nor should looking at that cross tonight lead us to fear that all these failures of ours, all the betrayals, all the denials, are leading to the point where God is finally going to just throw up his hands in frustration and disgust and say, "I'm done with you." No. No. Jesus' death on that cross is actually proof of God's great love for us at our worst. And if any of us have a hard time believing that, just wait till Sunday.